Hello everyone. It's once again for the type of the lecture that you like the most. It's step by step. It's meant to be good for medium level players, for low rated guys, for those who know nothing about the openings, because in the following video I'll try to present you the main ideas for black in Caro Kann. There is one thing about this video, it wasn't easy to make. There are so many lines, and you can't say that after this video you're gonna be able to know everything about Caro Kann. But what I just tried to give you my advices, my choice of lines, because I used to play this variation for 7 years, coached many students, and also the most critical ones tried to cover in a fashionable or very interesting way. Let's immediately get started because it's gonna be a pretty long one. So let's go. After e4, c6. First, I need to tell you something about the Caro Kann itself. It's a very tough opening. Throughout the history, one of its main representatives was Anatoly Karpov. Anatoly Karpov, positional player. Many guys who play e4 hate to face Caro Kann players because they're extremely solid. They play a very boring lines, and you won't be able to break with the white pieces Caro Kann just like that. Especially after this video, hopefully it's not gonna be possible. And I'm pretty sure that for all of you who intend to play the Caro Kann opening and to have it solid approach against e4, you occasionally can take a look at this video and remind yourself of the most important things and lines. So after c6, we first have to check all those sidelines. I decided to begin this lecture with so-called hillbilly attack. Hillbilly attack became very popular. I'm just going to make an interesting digression because you're going to be able to find hillbilly attack for white on this channel. So just take a look at it, and if you're willing to try it out from white's perspective, you're going to be able to find videos somewhere on the channel. After bishop c4, of course that we have to go with d5. Hillbilly attack makes no sense if they take, because that's exactly the point of Caro Kann. You just take by c-pawn, and then you're gonna be able to jump with the knight on c6 and get a full control of the center afterwards. That's why they have to move the bishop back to b3. You play d takes e4, and black is already up a pawn. So what's the hillbilly attack? White has to go with my favorite queen, because you know how much I like queen going to h5. They go with queen h5 and threaten mate on, not mate, but complete destruction of the black's game if queen f7 happens. And here, I'd like to make a very important differentiation between two moves. You have e6 and g6 possibility. It's way better, in my opinion, to play e6 than to go with g6. If you go with g6, yes, you gain tempo, you kick this queen away, you defend f7, but after knight f6, knight c3, bishop g7, f3, I don't think that these guys should have some special problems, because they just go with d5, bishop h6, rook a8 to e1, knight g5, and they would have a very similar position to a Grand Prix attack, which is not so difficult for playing. What I like in these lines, and when I play against some lines, I like to play something that I enjoy and where my plan is so obvious for me. I don't want to give my opponent, even at the sake of a pawn, like an easy game where he just, like follows his plan, main idea, and it's not even difficult for him to play. That's why I'm suggesting you to go with e6. So when they go knight c3, knight f6, you defend pawn on e4 and attack queen on h5. Queen h4. Key move is not to develop your bishop, but to go with the knight bd7. And simply black already has a great position where it already has lots of practical difficulties, because they can't take on e4. Simply we take on e4 play knight c5, and for the rest of the game, they are going to have problems with the light square bishop. Actually, we're immediately threatening to take on b3 and to win the bishop pair. Why? Black doesn't have a single problem anymore. Another thing after c6, so this was a hillbilly attack, is knight e2. This is another very interesting line that I used to play with the white pieces. For the first time, I learned about this move from one of Nigel Short's games. He played few times and made some very nice and attractive wins with white pieces. And you also can find this from white's perspective on the channel. I believe I called it Corona system or something like that, because it was beginning of Corona and I was just doing this and I called it like Corona system for white. After knight e2, you just go d5 and they go e5. That early knight jump has its points. You shouldn't commit yourself early with a bishop f5 and such stuff, but here you have two opportunities. Since Caro Kann is meant for those solid and extreme players who like positions where they just develop the light square bishop, unlike the French where you have problems with it. Here I'm suggesting you two type of ideas. So you have c5, and c5 is nice classic one. So when they play d4, knight c6, c3, you first take on d4 and play bishop f5. That's exactly the difference between Caro Kann and French, because in French you usually have problems with this bishop. Here it goes on f5, sometimes it goes on g4, but if I have to make a conclusion, where does it go on g4? Almost always when the knight on f3. But when the knight on e2, you should avoid doing that because they always have the tempo with f3. Here we go on bishop f5. We just want to go with some e6 and knight b4, not knight b4 immediately because of queen a4 check. So when they go knight bc3 and e6, if you ask me which approach should I suggest to you, should it be this one? As someone who's solid, who likes positional play, healthy pawn structure, good position, this is a relatively good approach. Any h4 should be met by h5. Any bishop d3, you just take plain knight e7 and so on. The thing is, you want to play queen b6, rook c8, bishop b4 followed by knight g and e7, and black shouldn't have any problems. From another point of view, if you really want to have an alternative, something crazy, but that's not the essence of this opening, and probably you shouldn't look for something like that in your Caro Kann approach. But if you want to play that, then go with d4. Point of d4 is to prevent d4 by white and to kind of isolate pawn on e5. So when they go with c3, you go c5. There are so many options. C takes d4 and so many other things. Mamedov, who's the main representative of this line with the white pieces, played b4 a couple of times, but a key move is knight c6. That's a key move. So when they take, you just push your pawn up to d3, and when they take, you just play knight e5. Van Forest played a game like this. Black shouldn't have special problems in this position. I kind of like Black's game. It looks okay. White also has some problems with his development, but just like I said, this is for a further analysis, something crazy, and this is just the alternative to the one that I gave you. Third option could be knight f3. After knight f3, d5, they have two options. First of all, have you ever heard or have you ever seen apocalypse variation, where they just go with the knight on e5? Carlsen used it a couple of times. Of course, after he used it, many other guys tried with this knight e5 with an early jump into the center, but it leads nowhere for white. It looks attractive, it looks interesting, but it's nothing that special. They threatened bishop e5, let's be honest, but when you play like knight c6, they just have to go with d4. You should never take on e5 because then you might have problems with the knight on g8 because knight f6 will no longer be possible. So you just go with e6. And when you go with e6, I'll show you two types of games. First, played by a good friend of mine and Serbian GM, who at that time played for a Serbian team. Nowadays he's a coach of Serbian team with me. Sedlak, who played against Wojtaszek. He played c3. He's a London system player, well known, and this position has some similarity with the London from White's point of view. Although Wojtaszek played a great move, bishop d6, immediately challenging the knight on e5. Sedlak played f4, and Wojtaszek played the most flexible knight g7 move. What I like about this move is that he can afterwards play an easy f6, kicking the knight away from e5, and afterwards just having a nice and easy game. After bishop d3, you still cannot do that, because if you play f6, queen h5, g6, and knight g6 would win the pawn and crush the white's game. Sorry, black's game. You just go castles, and after castles, Wojtaszek played f6, kicked the knight away from the center. Afterwards, he had a wide options of breaking in the center with e5, playing b5, b4 with a minority attack, which is typical idea in Caro Kann, or maybe doing something else in these positions. And another line is bishop b5. That's what majority of these guys did. Here I have a nice system. You play bishop d7, and watch out. Right now, you threaten to take by knight on e5 and to win the piece. How? If they play bishop d7, knight on e5 will recapture on d7 up a piece. If they take by pawn, you take on b5. Most of these guys here captured in the past on d7, winning the bishop pair. But here, losing the bishop pair shouldn't be a big problem for us. Bishop d6, knight f6. Why knight f6? Because naturally white just wants to drag this knight from the queen side onto the king side. From b1, it goes to d2 and eventually ends up on f3. Here, you just have to unpin yourself with a6. So when they go back with the bishop on d3, it's the right and the last moment to jump with the knight into the center of the board with a knight e4. What's so special about this one? First of all, you just stuck this knight into the center of the board. You want to support it by f5. You all know, or even if you don't, then you'll figure it out, how annoying is this knight for white, a knight on e4, when it's supported by both pawns on d5 and f5. So black should be absolutely fine. Then you also have two knights, one of those videos that many of you liked in the past. You can find it here on my channel. You can find it on the Chessbra. I did it both. Of course, this one on this channel is a newer one and with a more recent analysis. So my approach with the white pieces against Caro Kann was always two knights. And there are so many options for black. For you, I just opted d takes e4 and knight f6. What's the point? If they capture an f6, Caro Kann with e takes f6, where the knight stands on f3, is bad for white. So you just play bishop d6, short castle, queen c7, rook e8, bishop e6, knight d7, knight f8, b5, or f5, knight f6, and you just have a nice game. For example, d4, bishop d6, bishop d3, castles, castles. Then you just go with knight d7. You just go with a rook e8 or whatever, and your knight goes like this. Or you go at some point b5, knight b6, bishop e6, knight d5, and do stuff like that. Another thing is what happens if knight g3. In a recently finished Olympiad, one of my Serbian teammates and members, famous GM Ivanišević, played h5 against guy from Indonesia. If h4, you immediately stick your bishop on g4 and no one can get rid of it for the rest of the game. And then you just play e6, bishop d6, queen c7, knight b7, typical Caro Kann idea. Or after h5, h3, you just kick the knight away with h4. And here you have two options. To play c5, to fight against d4. But Ivanišević likes original positions, and he opted for queen a5. And after knight c3, this position reminds me of Scandinavian just with a pawn on h4, which would be even an improved version of Scandinavian for black. And I was very surprised when I saw his reaction during the game, because I liked it. And, I always like those original solutions out of the openings. He went for g5. The thing is, he just wants to push this pawn up to g4, d4, g4, in order to be able to jump with the knight into the center. He captured and played bishop e6. He played against an IM from Indonesia, had a good position all the time, but White also played pretty tough and pretty solid, and they eventually made a draw. And finally, if they go queen e2, you have to remember here, just don't you ever make a pre-move like this, because smothered mate. So don't forget about this. I won a couple of times with a white pieces like this. You shouldn't do that, but you should play like bishop f5. What I like about bishop f5 is that you force white to immediately commit himself. They gotta take, you take by g pawn. You threaten to take here, so they go with d3, knight d7, and when they play g3, Vashia played it a couple of times. Also, Carlsen played it against Anand until Anand played knight e5 and equalized on the spot. After knight e5, came up with this check. After bishop d2, captured by queen, and they just exchanged everything. Okay, White has a healthier pawn structure, but let's be honest, position is roughly equal. Maybe tiny bit better for White, but it's nothing that serious. Apart from that, I can give you a second alternative to queen e2. And that is knight takes e4, queen takes e4, knight d7, bishop c4, knight f6, and knight e5. Don't you dare to even think of taking the queen on e4, because White threatens mate in 1. So you gotta play e6, and when they play queen e2, keep in mind, this is a very popular line lately. They threaten, for example, if you play any knight d7, knight f7, and they win, because after this is mate. So you can play this, and here you have a specialty, it's b5. Couple of my students, including my son, didn't know about this move, and they lost their games with the most logical and most tempting knight c6, queen c7, bishop b5. Looks like White just won 2 pawns, and we absolutely are about to resign our game. But one move will change everything. So what's that? a6 first, threatening bishop. They gotta go back here, otherwise knight on c6 is dropping, and bishop d7. And that's exactly the point. You can't move the knight because bishop is hanging. You can't move the bishop. You can't defend this knight. The only way to defend it is with the queen c4, in which case rook c8 just wins the piece. Same thing happens if queen f3, you just play rook c8, and then you're just going to win one of those 2 pieces. Just like you see, that's a very nice trick. So you're probably wondering, so what should we do? That depends on their reaction. If they play bishop b3, now they're really threatening to take on c6. Now you play queen c7, and position is okay. Bishop d6, short castle, and so on. If they play bishop d3, now you can't play queen c7 because they will take. And now you can't touch the knight because you would lose the queen. So now you play bishop to b7. And according to theory, after b3, queen c7, bishop b2, bishop d6, f4, a relatively complicated game. Whenever they play a4, you should play b4, where you probably have to go with knight d5 at some point and launch some sort of kingside action with the black pieces. I gave you so many options and alternatives. Time for the next line. So we've seen bishop c4, knight e2, knight f3. It's time to show you a fourth move. It's knight to c3. On knight to c3, you play d5. We've already seen like a variation with knight f3, 2 knights. And it's time to check something against variation that I also covered here on my channel from White's angle. It's queen f3. This is what I faced in blitz against Nigel Short on Play Chess like 10-15 years ago. I was a little bit surprised. It's also Portuguese IM Rui Damaso, who plays the Portuguese gambit and who likes this line with the white pieces. Played it a couple of times, and it's interesting one. He certainly forces you to decide whether you want to push your pawn or to take on e4, or just to defend it with e6, but at the cost of development of the light square bishop. I played a game in Bulgaria against one Bulgarian IM, and he was absolutely shocked when I played d4. He played bishop c4, threatening on f7. I played knight f6, and probably he was so happy when I played d5 because he probably thought I would take on c3. No, that wasn't my intention. I instantly played knight bd7, and then he realized he was in homemade analysis. I played knight bd7, and I really made at that time homemade analysis with the knight bd7. Point is that when he captured, I played like this, and that was a very interesting game because now he had lots of troubles how to carry on in this position, and I played knight e5, won the bishop pair, sacrificed the pawn, but afterwards I just had a great activity and had a great position. And finally, out of all these side variations, I just have to show you c4. What's the point of c4? Reminds me on c4 against French. You just play d5. When they take, and take. You just go with knight f6. They go knight c3, and they go queen a4. Queen a4 was a very interesting option for so many years. The point is to force you to move your light square bishop, in which case they would just bring the queen back to d3, keep the pawn on d5 for the time being, and then you have problems with both how to regain the pawn on d5 and what to do with the pawn on b7. After knight bd7, which is my suggestion for you, knight c3, g6, knight f3, bishop g7, bishop c4, castles. Here, they first play d3. That's a more common idea, because anytime you play knight b6, they want to move the queen and recapture by pawn on c4, in which case they fix the pawns. Here I'm suggesting a6 with the idea of b5, knight b5, or bishop b5 and knight b6. Knight will defend the rook, and then you can easily take on b5. They move the queen away on a3, and you play b6. Castles, bishop b7, rook e1, b5, bishop b3, and I checked some games here of Carlsen and others. You just defend the pawn on e7. You'd like to go with some a5 and b4 because the queen is pretty much stranded on a3. While at the same time, you want to go with knight b6, knight e5, but also if they ever capture on b5, you're just easily going to recapture on d5. Yes, for the time being, you're going to be down opponent, but you have a great compensation, mainly thanks to the queen being misplaced on the edge of the board. And just one last line, side line, before we go into the main four lines, it's d3. This is what Robert James Fisher used to play. For those who play King's Indian attack, they might go with this move against you, thinking like, okay, maybe we should be going with this, playing the King's Indian attack. That's not an option, and you don't have to panic. And after that, you just go d5, and they go knight e2. Amongst so many lines and possibilities, my vote goes to e5, knight g on f3, and bishop d6. Simply, I'd like to complete the center. I'd like to play knight e7, short castle, and break in the center with f5. I didn't want to go too deep into those lines in order not to confuse you, in order just to give you like the main ideas. For example, here, if they play d4 straight away, you just take on d4. And when they play like this, you don't have to take on d5. Just play, for example, knight f6. And d takes, you play knight c6, and your position is good. Bishop e2, castles, just go, for example, with the bishop c7, and you don't play with a classic isolated pawn. Why not classic isolated pawn? Because classic isolated pawn would be on d5. If the isolated pawn is pushed on d4, if your opponent somehow allows it to you, then you already have a good position. From another point of view, most of these guys who go for the King's Indian attack, they go with g3. Not a big deal. You can play knight e7 followed by castle and f5. You can also play knight f6. Here I like both. So knight e7, bishop g2, short castle, and you can go with straight f5, but in my opinion, you should show a little bit more patience. First play knight d7 and maybe even bring this knight there and not to rush with that plan. And then you're probably wondering, well, if I don't want to play that immediately, why should I play like this? That's a good point. Go with knight f6. They go with bishop g2, castles, and then you just overprotect pawn on e5 with rook e8. So rook e8, rook e1, knight bd7, and any c3 with a possibility to go with b4 to get some queenside space, you react with a5. Anatoly Karpov was a master for these positions. I still remember how he managed to outplay Yasser Seiravan, and I'm just showing you like the basic first couple of moves and principles and giving you the plans. What should you do afterwards? Queen here, knight either goes on c7 or on on c5 or on f8, and you can even consider playing some b5, getting some space on the queen side. It's time for the main lines. So it's time for the main lines, and here I just covered 4 main approaches. So let's go one by one, and to make this video very simple for you. The first one that I want to cover with you after d4 and d5 will be fantasy variation. Fantasy variation used to be very popular, especially like 15 to 20 years ago, when Morozevich used it against someone, crushed him in a small number of moves. And it's a very interesting line if you don't know any theory. And usually people who play Caro Kann confront with this move for the first time and they don't know, and they usually say, this looks bad. Usually we should take play e5, and then when your opponent comes up with some crazy knight f3 and you take and they go with bishop c4, then you realize that it's already too late to think of anything, but probably in how small number of moves you're going to be able to lose this game with the black pieces. In order not to go into these complications, after f3, in fantasy variation, I always suggest hyper solid e6 approach. I know that it looks a little bit weird to have these 3 pawns, and I'm gonna put yellow color on these pawns. But do you think that I gotta put yellow color on these pawns as well? Because they do have a center, but they have very possibly weak dark squares on f2 and d3 and pawn on f3 that certainly doesn't belong there. When they play knight c3, you play like a win-over line, but win-over line improved. You have the light square bishop. You don't have problems with the dark squares afterwards when they play a3. And on top of all that, if they play ever a3, you don't have to take. You can just move the bishop and move it back to c7 or b6 in some of these lines. So after a3, bishop a5, I want to show you what happens in the biggest number of lines. Games. Knight g2 makes sense. They just create flexible knights. So if you ever take, they just want to recapture by knight. Recently, I spoke to one of the best Serbian women chess players. She played against GM, and I told her, don't ever place. She played knight f6. No. In fantasy variation, your knight goes on e7. That's the point, and that's what you have to remember. Why? Because if you move your knight to f6, your opponent will always do e5 with tempo, and he doesn't have problems with the pawn structure, because just like in Aleka and Marozzi Gambit, another video against the French opening that you can find here, against the winner line, here they have flexible knights, and they earn tempo with this move e5. So what's the point? The point is, we just go with knight e7, they go a3, and we never give it up because they already put these flexible knights on e2 and c3. So after bishop a5, bishop e3, castles, queen d2, knight d7. And what are we waiting for? The point is that we always wait for our opponent to do castle. As soon as they do castle, and that's what's going to be done by 60%, 70% of players, don't hesitate, mate them immediately. So just like you see, even in this video, and even for you who probably always thought that Caro Kann is so boring and so positional, I even find some interesting ways for you to attack. Here, you want to go knight b6, knight c4, but you also want to go with b4 because a3 has been played, so b4 is going to go smooth with tempo. Knight g3 is the main move without committing themselves with a long castle, in which case b5, you don't want to phone to your opponent. What are you going to do in case he plays castle? You're just setting up everything for b5 in case he plays castle. So here we go with f5, and here I have a novelty for you. Nobody ever played it. You break into the center with e5. You will be able to take afterwards an f5 by knight in the proper moment. You want to take on d4 followed by c5, breaking everything in white's game. Black already looks better. I don't want to go that far. I'm just going to say with a mutual counter chances and pretty good counterplay for black. If bishop f4, what Morozovic played in his games, knight e7, queen d3, this queen on d3 looks good. Because queen on d3, they just opens up long castle and at some point wants to find its better place on e3. You always should challenge it with b6. Knight e2, bishop a6, queen a3, castles, castles. And if you remember the following move, because all previous moves were more or less logical, then you just equalize immediately, even getting some sort of initiative. You break in the center with c5. Don't forget about this move. We've seen the fantasy variation. It's time for the next one. And next one belongs to the one that we hate a lot. E takes d5. Why do I say we hate it a lot? Because it's exchange variation against Caro Kann. Just like in French, many French and Caro Kann players hate it because it's so solid for white. And we don't hate it. I was just joking. I'm just going to show you a very easy approach for black. Actually, I'll give you a main approach and alternative, and you should like what I'm about to show you. So when they play bishop d3, you just play knight c6. They go c3, and you have two options. A more aggressive one is queen c7. I played it once in my life, played against an IM, and one game in 21 move, I made it my opponent. I'll even show you the plan that I applied in that game. Solomunovic was my opponent. After queen c7, they have knight e2 and h3. Those who play knight f3, you should never hesitate. You just have to immediately pin the knight, and you have a great game. Castles e6, bishop d6 threatening bishop h2 with the battery. They gotta play h3. You play knight e7. Black absolutely doesn't have a single problem. If you ever provoke them to do g4, you go bishop g6, in which case anytime they exchange, you can even recapture by pawn and have an open h-file, and they should have a weakness on h3. If not, you can even take by knight on g6 in some lines, but this is considered to be slightly better for black. If h3, that's what my opponent did. I'll show two plans. Plan that a big number of guys think that could work here, and it actually does work, but it's not the best in my opinion, is e5. D takes, knight takes. You play with an IQP and you just take all those measures and the typical ideas when you play with an IQP. Problem is that IQP, because in many of these lines it could turn out to be very weak, and you know the old good problem of the IQP pawns, the more you exchange, the worse that pawn is going to be. So that's why against Solomunovic I played g6. An idea of g6 is to play bishop f5. Keep in mind, my idea of g6 is not to play bishop g7. Okay, at some point, if I have to do that, if I have to do it, I'll really do it. But that's not a point. Point of g6 is to play bishop f5. My opponent and I went for knight f3. I played bishop f5. He captured, I recaptured. He still didn't realize what was happening on the board. I was extremely happy with my position. And just like I told you, I won the game not even putting a, like big efforts. I just had an easy game. Played knight f6, played e6, and then what did I do? I jumped with my knight on e4, played long castle, bishop d6, doubled my rooks on g6 and g8, and mated the guy along the g file. What a simple game with the black pieces. And that's one thing about the queen c7. Another thing is after queen c7, knight e2, you always play bishop g4 because you always want to provoke them to play f3. When they play f3, you bring it back, and now you've just created and forced white to commit himself with two weaknesses. Weak dark squares, weak e3 square, and kind of weak pawn on f3 that opens up white's king and its position. After bishop f4, a5, d takes, knight takes, bishop c2, just go bishop d6, knight f6, and you have a full not compensation, you have a full initiative because they really have a potentially weak king and lots of weak squares on the dark squares for the rest of the game. Finally, if on bishop d3, knight c6, c3, you don't like queen c7 ideas, and those ideas are a little bit more aggressive than the ones that I can show you right now, then you can go with knight f6. The point of knight f6, after bishop f4, they want to stop both queen c7 and e5. You play bishop g4. It's such an important move to do before you take any action. Why? Because before you play e6 and lock your bishop on c8, you just want to come out with this bishop on g4 and simply play a game like this. So when they play queen b3, you play queen d7, knight e2 in order to play knight f3, otherwise we would just take and spoil the pawns. e6, knight f3. We always, without any hesitation, should give up the bishop for the knight because here position is pretty closed, position is pretty blocked, so you shouldn't be that afraid of giving up the bishop for the knight, losing the bishop pair, and on top of all that, you immediately exchange the bishops like this. I can show you, but you don't have to worry that the queen b7 is a difficulty here. You always can go rook b8, and here you shouldn't go rook b2 because of some bishop b5, but you should first play like this, and then you're going to be able to capture that pawn. If they play like this, I mean, this is such a simple position where everything is broken in their game, and your game is just so good. So when they play castles, they all go with a rook a to e1. They would love to jump with the knight on e5, play f4, and go with this rook onto the king side and start doing the king side attack. Knowing that, we also have to be very fast. We also have to be very typical and to go with a minority attack. Rook a b8 followed by b5 and b4. So after knight e5, you can't immediately play that, but you gotta bring your queen back to c7. When they play f4 supporting the knight and slowly but surely doing the attack, you play b5. No, they can't take on b5 because you just take on e5, jump knight e4, and you threaten knight e2, or if they move the queen, I won one of my blitz games with a knight c5. When they take, I recaptured, took on b5, and I had much better endgame. So after queen d1, you play knight e7. The point is, knight on e7 fights against f5, brings my knight into the defense in a way better fashion than when it standed on c6. And more importantly, I like to break on the queen side with b4, to take on c3, and to create a backward pawn. That has to be your plan, and that's how it works in these lines. Let's go for two main lines, and it's time for line that traditionally has been considered the most solid main line for the last, I believe, 100 years. It's the knight c3. On knight c3, of course, we take, and here I'll show you three options for black. You have Karpov favorite move knight d7, bishop f5, and knight f6. On knight f6, I want to show you something. I just briefly want to mention this. They have knight f6, and you have nowadays very popular e takes f6. You remember that I told you that if they move the knight to f3, you already have an easy game and kind of equalized your game. That's one thing. Second thing, nowadays everybody plays against this line c3, bishop d6, bishop d3, castles, queen c2, rook e8, knight e2, and now Nowadays, everybody defends this pawn and a launch kind of action on the king side with h4 and h3. And this became a very popular line, and nowadays you can almost every day, for example, even in Olympiad, I saw a couple of games being played like this. Although there is Larsen's line with g takes f6. I'd like to make a video, but a special lecture from Black's perspective for the Caro Kann players with the g takes f6. Very interesting one. Once again, the main idea is just c3, in which case you play bishop f5. And what I like about this line, it's simple plan. Whatever they do, you just go knight d7. Whatever they do, you just go queen c7. Whatever they do, you just go first long castle. Then you want to break with e5. And then you want to play rook g8 and do the king side attack along the g file and on the king side like this. I like it. You bring your bishop to d6, rook on the g file. You just have to admit that this looks good. This, at least, it looks very, very tempting for simply to try it out a couple of games with the black pieces, and for blitz, for rapid chess, for these active time controls, it should be working perfectly fine. That's one thing, but in this video, I'm going to give you Karpov's favorite move, and the one that I used to play when I played Caro Kann. It's knight d7. An idea of knight d7 is just like in Rubinstein's French. You would like to play knight f6. So after knight d7, they have knight g5, bishop c4, and knight f3. If knight f3, you play knight f6. Those lower-rated guys and medium-level guys can expect knight f3 in most of the games. People don't know the theory, so you can expect this one the most. If they play bishop d3, you just take, jump like this, and here you have a very attractive option. Of course, that you can play bishop g4 followed by queen d5, which equalizes on the spot, but you can also have fun with your opponents exchanging the light square bishops like this. You say, Maya, what are you talking about? Who's exchanging? You've just blundered the bishop. No, you have check, and then you just take on f5 and you equalize the game. So I just gave you two options, and you're just going to decide which one do you like more. Second thing is knight f6. I expect by lots of guys to play like this against you. Knight f6 and bishop c4. Once again, you shouldn't forget about the basic trick. You gotta play bishop f5 to develop your light square bishop before you play e6. If you don't do that, but if you play bishop g4, they're just going to go with the knight e5 and you're dead, because you can take the queen, bishop f7, or simply they can take bishop f7 followed by knight e5, and you've just lost. They just spoiled a castle, won the piece back, and won the pawn in total. So that's why you have to play bishop f5. And here, when they play castles, e6, c3, bishop d6, queen c7, you should never be afraid. Actually, you should be happy if this happens, because you go with the long castle, place the rook on the open file, double up your rooks, and you just have everything on the king side and along the g file. There is one more thing against knight d7. After knight f3, knight f6, knight g3. If this happens, you always go with a very typical way of fighting in the center. You play e6, developing the dark square bishop. You break it with c5 immediately. You don't develop the dark square bishop, but break it. You probably saw the miniature that I published last night. It was about a line like this. And I said, don't develop. The guy made and developed the dark square bishop, which was a mistake, but immediately play c5. So if they capture, you just take by a bishop. And that's the thing. If they don't take, then you just go with b6, bishop b7, queen c7, and so on. If they take, your plan isn't going to be too different. You play b6, bishop b7, and then you'll decide h5, h4, long castle or short castle, rook a d8, rook f to e8, and playing like this. And finally, if on knight d7 they go with bishop c4, it transposes into the line knight g5 that I want to show you. So let me show you. Knight g5 is the main move, and it's strictly theoretical. That's why I'm of opinion that if you ever play this against someone who doesn't know the theory, you can never expect knight g5. It's no logical. The thing is, you shouldn't go with h6 because they have this knight e6 thing. And you can never capture because it's mate. And if If you don't capture, then they will be able to capture an f8, and you'll be left with simply without a bishop pair in a game that is fairly open. So after knight g on f6, they have two options: bishop c4 and bishop d3. Main move is bishop d3, while bishop c4 is something that I used to play with white pieces. You play e6, defending on f7. They go queen e2. Watch out. Watch out, because they threaten knight f7 followed by queen e6. For example, if you're not careful, you can get mated knight f7, queen e6, bishop d3, and queen h3 is mate. Checkmate in just 10 moves in Caro Kann. That's why you gotta know your stuff. I remember played against I.M. Szczekic. And at that time I was white and played queen e2. Szczekic played bishop e7 without paying attention. And I forgot to play knight f7 with white pieces. I was white. So that's why you gotta learn your tricks. You gotta learn tricks by your opponent, because that's what make one being very special or just tricky out of the opening. So you hear f7 is hanging, e6 is hanging, and all you have to do, you just have to go with knight b6. Knight b6 defends both f7 and f7, e6 and f7 weaknesses, and harasses the light square bishop. They can bring it back to b3 or d3. If it goes to b3, you kick the knight away now, because no more knight f7 options. Break with c5. Go with queen c7, threatening to win the piece with c4. Knight bd5, knight g on f3, a6. You just take on e3, bishop pair, and you just play a game like this. Position is roughly equal. We do have a bishop pair, but they have a little bit more space, potentially open f-file that could be dangerous, and position is with mutual chances, I'd say. If bishop d3, you just kick the knight away, break with c5, play knight bd7, going back with the knight on b6 that meant nothing, capture, play queen c7, and this is the thing. For example, here I want to show you the trick. They cannot play bishop f4 because you play like this, and they can never play c3 because you play like bishop c3. That's one thing. Another thing, if they just go with a move like castles, you just play castles, bishop f4, bring your bishop back to d6, and now you just threaten knight h5. Position is absolutely fine for black, and black shouldn't have a single problem here. And finally, I just have to show you the main line when they play knight e4 and bishop f5. The biggest number of games in the history of chess have been played here. Not in knight e7, not in knight f6 lines. Knight f6 nowadays is the most popular. Knight e7 is for some reason out of popularity. And bishop f5 used to be a classic approach by black players for all these years. When they play knight g3, they just chase this bishop away. If they play knight c5, you equalize on the spot, and you gotta know those lines, because you just have to immediately claim like opening advantage if they play these weird moves. Idea is to play bishop d3, but then you just play e5, undermining knight on c5, playing queen b6, threatening this knight, capturing, and here you already have better development because you even threaten to take on c2. They gotta play c3, you play knight f6, playing castles, and just like you see, no matter what I do, you just have a nice game. Black is a little bit better, even though they have possession of the bishop pair. Because we have mobility of these pawns, we can put the light square bishop back and go with f5. When they go knight g3, you go bishop g6. For all these years, main move was h4, of course. What happens with my favorite move that I used to play when I was a kid and once scored so many nice wins, until I lost for the first time against Grandmaster Martinovic. That's a good statement by Grandmaster Ermenkov. He told me once, play one line till you lose the first game. He speaks about the suspicious lines. Till you win with that line, play it all the time. But the very first time you lose it, then quit it. And I played against Grandmaster Martinovic. No, we drew that game, but I wasn't any more happy with that line. I played bishop c4, e6, knight e2, 1. And here, he knew the refutation idea by white is to play castles, f4 and f5. Who doesn't know this? I won all my games with white. But when black players knows that, and you will know it, you just play bishop d6, and on f4 you play knight e7. You stop f5. They can't push it anymore. I want to go with the queen d7 afterwards, and they absolutely, black doesn't have a single problem anymore. Second thing that was made by a good friend of mine, Guid Matej from Slovenia, and he showed me some tricks with the knight h3, is knight h3. They just want to bring the knight on f4. They want to play bishop c4, queen e2, and they want to get rid of the bishop like this, winning the bishop here. There are two approaches. One is knight f6. I'm not a big fan of this one. And e5. Knight g6, d takes, bishop here, because in my opinion, with the bishop here and a little bit healthier pawn structure, it has to be tiny bit better for white. It has to be practically better for white. So that's why after knight h3, I suggest you e6. Sorry, e6. And after knight f4, I have a specialty of mine and grandmaster. Of course, not mine. I actually learned that by Grandmaster Drav, who's an expert for Caro Kann. He plays queen h4. Now you can't go with h4 and h5 harassing that bishop. If you ever take out recapture and go like this, you're never going to be able. Also, I'm pressuring your knight with the bishop d6 afterwards. You don't even have possibility to jump with these knights like this with knight h5. So the queen h4 stops absolutely everything. What a useful move. And if they go h4, you just go h6. They go knight f3 to jump knight e5. Go after the bishop, knight d7, h5, bishop d3, you just capture, and you go with e6. Bishop d2, knight g on f6. Here, don't play traditional bishop d7. Play knight f6, bishop e7, and short castle. I also want to, and I need to explain you the plans for black here. There are ideas where you push your pawn a5, a4, a3 on the dark squares. There are ideas where you place b5 and just sit your knight on d5 and sit and wait. Usually good players who play this line, they will go with knight e4 sooner or later. Those who go with knight e4, they're just willing to go with some g4 when you play short castle. But that's not going to happen that easy because we just go into the center of the board, pressuring pawn here. So when they play c4, we just go queen e4. If they exchange, and they have to, literally everybody did it, you just play f5 and you just have a very equal position. And if you ask me, out of the opening, we shouldn't have a single problem. So you just play short castle, sometimes f4, sometimes not. Sometimes bring the knight back on f6, g4, sometimes bishop f6, rook d8. I mean, it depends on concrete circumstances. There is no like specific and universal plan for black. And time for nowadays the most critical line. A line that was considered to be one of the main ones, but nowadays, since literally everyone plays that, everyone goes with e5. It's advanced variation against Caro Kann, and here I opted for you for the main move, bishop f5. I gotta reveal a secret. I gotta reveal a secret to you that I played Caro Kann for 7 years, lost only one game within those 7 years, till I came to the Serbian League, where on the third board, I believe I played against 4 GMs, and I lost all those 4 games in Caro Kann. Those were GMs rated from 2450 to 2550, 2600. It's not that they were so strong, simply they found a line that killed me. It was advanced variation with knight f3. A little bit more about that variation later. And let me just show you all those side lines that are possible here. Those who play straight bishop d3, it's nothing. It's nothing ever since from Capablanca. You just give check, bring your queen to a6. You're happy to exchange queens and afterwards to play a good version of the French defense without the queens because you traded off the light square bishops. Those who do g4, I believe, not caveman attack, but it has some crazy name. That looks aggressive and looks somehow special, but it's stupid as soon as black goes back with the bishop on d7. The thing is, when you play bishop d7, they can never go with e6 anymore, because you should not go with bishop on g6. Then anytime they play e6, for the rest of the game, you will have problems with the dark square bishop, and then they can easily go with bishop d3, and then you really have problems. They will first play h4, or they can play bishop d3, and then you might have problems. But you just go with the bishop d7, and then you play e6, c5, and you play good advanced French, where the pawn on g4 means nothing. Another thing is, apart from this, is to play early 92. Boris Spassky, he used this in the past. To be honest with you, I used this in 2 tournament games. I won both with white, but against weaker guys. After e6, knight g3, bishop g6, h4, both of them were unfamiliar with the best continuation, and that's h5. h5. What's so special about h5? Because both of them played h6, I pushed h5, played bishop d3, and when they captured, I recaptured by pawn. Then when I brought my queen on g4 and played castle f4, f5, f5 was unstoppable. So I believe they already gave you an answer. After e6, knight g3, h4, h5, the point is when they play bishop d3, you at some point when they play f4 just play g6. So they can never count on this idea anymore. And by the way, you just go with queen b6, threatening pawn on d4, pressuring and tying up the bishop and its defense for the pawn on b2, and you just have a nice and easy game afterwards. My favorite move nowadays with white pieces against Caro Kann is h4, Tal's variation. Against Tal's variation, I played a couple of times from black's point, and my results were really good. But you know, I knew it as a back of my hand because I used to play that with both white and black. So after h4, h5, you always have to play h5 against the Tal's variation. They have 2 possibilities. Caveman attack with bishop g5 doesn't seem to be working after Shankland played queen b6, threatening pawn on b2, and after bishop d3, you never take on b2 because bishop is hanging, but you take on d4. They cannot take on f5 because of check, and now you win 2 pawns. They cannot play anything else but knight f3. Now they threaten to queen and the bishop. You go queen g4, defending it. So when they take, castle e6, c4, you just play knight d7. And yes, you're down a pawn, but you just have to note that any c takes, you should answer with e takes d5. The point of this is that I won a game with a white pieces in a beautiful fashion in blitz. My opponent played c takes d5, knight c3, threatening knight b5, a6, rook c1, knight e7, knight e4, who cares about the pawn, rook e1, who cares about the pawn, and believe it or not, I won this with white pieces in 2 moves. Knight e5, my opponent had to capture, and knight e6. How I found, but I was familiar with this trick, of course, how I found an easy way of exploiting the king and the knight on d5 in a smooth fashion. c4. c4 was traditional approach with or without h5. You always go with the same e6. You always take on c4, play knight d7, and here my suggestion and vote goes to bishop e7. They all of a sudden have problems with the pawn on h4. Yes, we're willing to take it. They gotta go knight g3, bishop g6, knight g on e4, in which case you just go knight h6 and knight f5. Pressure and focus should be on both pawn on d4 and pawn on h4, but more importantly, you have a nice development of your pieces. And guys, I believe it's time to finally tell you what to do against the main line. It's knight f3 line, because of which I quit Caro Kann. After all these years, 2 very interesting lines appeared. Those are not the main lines, but for example, my students have lots of good results with it. For example, I taught one of my students, James, to play the following plan. So I'll show you 2 plans. I'll show you a plan that was introduced into practice by Grandmaster Galkin, an expert of Caro Kann. He played bishop e7. And now you're probably wondering, what the hell is the point of this move? Well, after a castle, it's h5. And now you'll see, I want to develop my knight on h6, and you're never going to be able to capture by bishop because I'll recapture by rook, and I'm going to keep a healthy pawn structure. So when I play h5, they have c4, knight b2, and this stuff. If c4 happens, that's bad. And I'll show you a game and a plan that you could always apply in these positions. Considering the fact that h5 was always already has been played, so you play d takes, knight e7, knight h6, and here don't hesitate, take advantage of the bishop on e7. Boom, g5. Those are one of the reasons against desperation. So after bishop e3, knight b6, you capture, you just jump with this knight, kick the knight away with g4, play h4, jump with the knight into the center, play the long castle, and look at the game. I apply this plan. Unfortunately, the moment when I lost all those games, I was unfamiliar with this plan. So I feel a little bit bad that I didn't know, and I was unfamiliar with this plan. Another thing is when you play h5, and when they play a little bit more cautious and classic, knight b2, knight e7, knight b3, nothing. It changes nothing. You just stick with your plan. So knight h6, bishop g6. One of my students asked me, Maya, can we go here with g5, queen c7, and long castles? Absolutely. If you're happy to attack, let it be. Maybe that's not in the spirit of the Caro Kann player, but I absolutely enjoyed this position. Also, you can go back with the bishop on g6, take on c4 anytime they play c4, and it's not defended by b3 pawn. Play knight b6, h4, knight f5, black is absolutely fine. So just like you see in all these positions, you just have a nice and easy game. And finally, if they play b3 to do c4, you still play knight h6, c4, knight e7, knight c3, and because they will either play some knight b5, c takes d5 and knight b5, or bishop b5, you just have to go with a6. Objectively speaking, white is a little bit better in this position. I want to show you one more plan. After bishop e2, it's what was introduced in a book about Caro Kann by my best student ever, Alexander Ipato, world junior champion, and the guy who reached 2700. Bishop b4. Bishop b4, what a comic and a little bit bizarre move. You play bishop b4. You were taught not to play check and to give your opponent tempo, to kick your bishop away with tempo. But here, it pleases you because your bishop goes back on a5 and this bishop goes back on c7. So after castles, knight d7, knight b2, bishop c7, you would like, not immediately because they have knight h4, but at some proper moment to break it with f6. Rook e1 makes sense, h6, knight f1, c5, knight g3, bishop g6, knight e7, and this is from the game Michael Adams against Mamajorov with the black pieces. I don't see any special problems. Objectively, white is a little bit better, but in Olympiad 2016, I just don't see special problems for black. On top of all this, before I finish this lecture, let me show you probably the best option and the one that I applied against two GMs. The first one I lost, and then in the second one I drew the game, but I believe it's absolutely a normal thing. So you just play h6, creating some shelter for the light square bishop if they ever chase it. They go castles and you go knight e7. And when they play like knight b2 and go with a typical knight b3 for a plan, knight e7, knight b3, point comes now. You just go with the knight c8. I learned about this plan by Ivanchuk, who brought this knight back to the c8. And this knight at some point wants to go in here. But also, if they go with a4, bishop e7, a5, you go a6. And when they go with c4, you can even capture and go with this knight straight to b5 and pressure the pawn here. That's a very nice thing. Or, if they don't play like this, but if they play straight away, for example, if they play bishop d2 to play knight a5, you can just go with knight b6, stick your knight on c4, which already could be a good and interesting idea. Finally, if they just go and wait, bishop e7, bishop f1, castles, just like you see at proper moment, I'm gonna break in the center with c5. Guys, I hope that you're satisfied. This was a pretty tiring, and I can for sure say the longest lecture I've ever made on my own channel. This was step by step for those who would like to play Caro Kann, or for those who would like to prepare Caro Kann within 1 hour. Thanks and good luck. Subscribe and donate. Bye bye.